Tell me about a scary situation in your life when you suddenly realized it's time to get out now. I was walking with my sister at a local park. We got there around 3 and hung around until 9 to 9:30 until we saw 3 guys wearing the same clothes on the other side of the park. I noticed them right away, but didn't take serious notice. We walked for about 2 more minutes, and I noticed one of them stop and stare at us. I immediately got a bad feeling and told my sister that we had to get out of there. She understood immediately, and we took off. Later that night, there was a breaking news report about a stabbing in the park, and the suspects were the 3 guys we'd seen. About 20 years ago, as a teenager, I was riding my bike home from a friend's house. We had all lost track of time and stayed out late, so I would come back when it was already dark. I lived about a couple kilometers from my friend's house. As I turned onto one of the roads leading to the house, I suddenly got a strange feeling. I look back and I see a headlight. Some kind of car stops at an intersection and slowly turns onto the road I'm driving on. There are almost no houses, lights, etc. along this road. As soon as they turned, I immediately tore into the woods and hid somewhere far off the road. The car slowed down, passed me, and moved on. I have no idea what they wanted, but I had no desire to get involved. A year ago, we had Hurricane Florence in our state. We planned to go out for a walk on the hill and in places where no high winds were expected. Oh, and for the most part, we didn't pay attention to the news warnings. The night before the hurricane, I got an extremely uneasy feeling in my stomach and started begging my dad to go to my sister's house, who lived a couple of hours from the sea. We even fought about it, but I eventually convinced him. We returned a week after the storm and saw a tree fall on our house, which was also flooded. A tornado had formed behind the house in the woods, which dropped the tree onto the roof of our house. After that incident, I always trust my gut, no matter how silly it may seem. A few years ago, my boyfriend had his own tire company. One day, unannounced, he went to a customer's house to have them write a check because they owed the company a large amount of money. Upon leaving the house, he was a bit agitated. He explained that there were many of the homeowner's brothers in the house, which is very unusual for him, and everyone was very nervous. They wrote him a check anyway, and then quickly sent him away. My boyfriend had a weird, anxious feeling that day. 2 days later, the client and his brothers were arrested for a murder they had committed the night before we arrived. We once decided with a friend to go to the woods to organize a camping trip. There were few camping sites in the area, and all of them were very far from each other. We would have spent one night there if the place was fully prepared and equipped with everything we needed. But in the end, we had to look for everything we needed and set up. We went to the nearest town for food, and when we were returning to our cozy little campsite, we met a man on the road. We crossed eyes with him and immediately felt uncomfortable. He looked at us with eyes of complete hatred, as if we were his enemies, but we had never seen him before in our lives. When we got back to the camp, we saw things scattered everywhere. Our bags were lying around the tent. Our clothes were scattered. Immediately, 2 hunting knives were missing, plus some of our clothes were missing. We immediately had the thought in our heads that the man we ran into on the way to camp had done it, because that trail doesn't lead anywhere but our place. We jumped in the car and drove back to where we had seen him, but he was no longer there. We drove a little further and came upon a common gathering place where other tourists were hanging out. So we got out and asked them, "Have any of you guys seen a man?" and described him. The crowd of people just stared at us in silence, which made us even more creepy. And then I said to my friend, "We have to go, right now." As we walked back to the car, we saw all of our stolen clothes behind the fence. We quickly gathered up all the clothes, but there wasn't a knife among them. Keeping in our heads that the guy was still there, that he had a knife with him, and that nobody was around us, we jumped in the car and quickly got away from there. We would never have stayed in those woods overnight. It was about 2 a.m., We were sleeping in a top-floor apartment when we suddenly woke up to the fire alarm going off. It was late, we didn't want to get up, and we thought it was a false alarm. But then I suddenly saw smoke coming from under the door. It was scary to imagine what was behind the door. We were running down the stairs, choking on carbon monoxide, and could barely see where we were running to. A horrible experience not to be forgotten. My freshman year of college, I went to a hangout, and there were some questionable types there. The night was getting really tense, but there were no fights, or anything like that. As the night went on, it became clear to me that something was up. I warned my buddy that it was time to leave. Not later than 5 minutes after we left, one guy was cut, and the one who cut him was shot. My car was stolen the same night we moved into a new house in a very nice neighborhood. Our neighbors warned us that our neighborhood has been rough lately, with occasional robberies. They told us how recently a woman was robbed who opened the door when someone knocked on her house in the middle of the night. Unknown assailants attacked her, robbed her, and almost killed her. Anyway, after the carjacking, we went straight to the police. A couple days later, in the middle of the night, I hear a knock on the door. "Open up, police." Well, keeping the story of the poor woman's recent robbery in my head, I was wary and didn't answer anything. I took the kids, took them to a room from which I could enter through a window onto the roof. I then called the police and told them that 2 men were knocking on our house, posing as police. I was told there were no police in the area and they would send a car immediately. Turns out these were the same guys who stole the car and suddenly decided to come back. I got my car back. They brought it back with them. While on vacation, I walked around a nature reserve. It was made in the form of a crater with a path at the very edge, on which you can walk down almost to the end. I had a strong gut feeling that fuck it to go down there. Later that day, I learned about a woman who had been killed by something heavy when children were throwing boulders and branches down the slope. I was walking down a long road. There were no houses, just a cemetery. A van with 2 guys pulled up to me and asked if I wanted a ride. This was in the late 90s, when hitchhiking was not something legal and common. So I told them, "No thanks, I'm almost home." They kept up, riding behind me with the windows down and coaxing me, "Come on, hop in." At some point, they just stop and start getting out of the van. I was just a teenager, and they were in their 20s. I realized that I had to tick off. I think I ran for about a kilometer until I got to the nearest alley and hid near the first building on the road. I waited for about 15 minutes, and only then, after making sure that they were behind me and would not continue following me, did I go home. Went on a second date with a guy. At one point, he wanted to go over to his house to grab something and invited me in. He was really hot, but I don't know why I felt some discomfort around him. We walked into his house, and it was straight up creepy inside. The guy was loaded with money, and the house itself was luxurious. It was spotless and absolutely sterile. There was nothing hanging on the walls. All the shelves were empty. There was nothing. No books, no CDs, nothing. I asked him how long he'd been there, and he said 5 years. He walked into the kitchen for some reason and yelled at me to go into his room and get his keys from the top dresser drawer. A creepy chill ran down my spine, and I immediately moved closer to the front door. There was no way I was going to let him get between me and the exit. He asked me to come into the room again, and I laughed and said, "No, man, I'm so hungry. Let's go." He asked me again, with obvious irritation, and then I started to get silly, whining about being hungry and why the hell he was taking so long. He went into a rage. I left the house, walked down the sidewalk, and he had to follow me. We got to the car, and I kept acting like a dumb chick and demanding that he take me home. He did. We drove in eerie silence. When he stopped the car in front of my house, he grabbed my face to kiss me goodbye. He bit my lip so hard it made me bleed, and then he slid his hand under my shirt and grabbed my nipple. Luckily, I shoved him off, fell out of the car, and ran home to his evil laughter. I ended up with bruises on my face and chest, a cut lip, and was terrified that he knew where I lived. I'm pretty sure I escaped a serial killer's attack. I remember driving down the mountains with my grandmother one day, and we saw a bear cub run out and stop in the road. He just stared at us and waited. Grandma hit the brakes and we got up. After, well, maybe 5 minutes, the bear cub finally moved on, but Grandma sat unmoving. I asked her what she was waiting for. Why weren't we moving? She pointed out the side window. That's why. I looked out the window and saw a big old bear cub slowly stomping after her cub. Yumi, it was wildly scary. But at least we had a car and could quickly steal out of there.